A young businessman sent a message asking for 3 crore rupees, but the amount of money wasn't the most disturbing part of what he wrote. He told the person he was contacting that his life depended on that money, that troubling thoughts were filling his mind, and that he wasn't even sure he would be able to meet him the next day. A few hours later, he left his home. By the following day, he was dead. At first, someone might look at the case and think the answer was obvious: financial losses, overwhelming pressure, and a tragic ending. But then his family began asking questions that didn't sit right with them. Why was there reportedly no blood at the place where his body was found? Why did a security guard say the young businessman was extremely afraid of guns? And if he was under financial pressure, why was his father convinced there were other ways he could have arranged the money? Now, his grave is being opened for another forensic examination. His father says he doesn't want to disturb his son's final resting place. He says he feels he has no choice, because he wants to know one thing above everything else: what really happened to Mir Raza Ali? The story begins with a message sent on July 28. Mir Raza Ali contacted a real estate builder he had previously spoken with and told him that he needed to meet him. The conversation reportedly went smoothly. But then Mir Raza made an urgent request. He needed 3 crore rupees. And he needed it fast. The message wasn't written like an ordinary business request. Mir Raza reportedly explained that his life depended on that amount. He also said he was having troubling thoughts. Then came an even more unsettling statement. He reportedly told the builder that he didn't know whether he would even be able to meet him the following day. He described the next morning as something he wasn't prepared to face. Think about that for a moment. Someone is asking you for a huge amount of money, telling you that their life depends on it, and at the same time saying they aren't sure they'll even make it to tomorrow. That's not a message you simply forget. And according to the case details, this message was sent shortly before everything changed. At around 4 p.m., Mir Raza reportedly left his home after arranging a ride. The next day, July 29th, his body was found. And that's when the questions began. His father was not satisfied with the way the case had been handled. He believed important aspects of the investigation, including forensic and medical evidence, had not been dealt with transparently. So the family decided to take the matter further. They hired lawyer Gibran Nasir, who began pursuing the case on the family's behalf. Then came a decision that showed just how serious their concerns had become. The family asked the court for permission to open Mir Raza's grave and conduct another examination. The request was eventually approved. A medical board was formed with specialists from pathology, forensic medicine, forensic identification, and medical legal services. For a family that had already buried their son, this was obviously not an easy decision. Mir Raza's father reportedly said that the condition of the body had been so poor that the family had identified him through his clothes. He also acknowledged that reopening the grave would be painful. But he said he was doing it because he wanted answers. He wanted to know who was responsible, why it happened, and how it happened. Then he raised a detail that immediately made the case even more complicated. According to his account, a police surgeon had said that no blood was found at the location where the body was discovered. That became one of the family's biggest questions. If the reported circumstances involved a serious injury, then where was the blood? Could the incident have happened somewhere else? Could the body have been moved afterward? These were questions raised by the family, not proven conclusions. And that's exactly why the new forensic examination mattered. Because if there was another explanation, the physical evidence would have to reveal it. But the blood question wasn't the only thing troubling the family. Investigators had also questioned a security guard who worked at the property. According to the account presented in the case, the guard said Mir Raza was extremely afraid of guns and pistols. He reportedly stayed away from firearms and was frightened of them. So another strange question appeared. If Mir Raza was normally so afraid of guns, why did he reportedly leave home with a pistol that day? His father had an explanation for that. He argued that carrying a pistol did not automatically mean Mir Raza intended to harm himself. In his view, the firearm could have been carried for protection. But again, that was his father's position. The investigation still had to establish what actually happened. And then investigators had to look at the reason Mir Raza had been desperate for money in the first place. According to the case details, his financial problems had begun around December 2025. He had reportedly suffered major losses in the digital currency business. By 2026, those losses had become much more serious. On one side, people who had lent him money were reportedly demanding repayment. On the other side, investments that he had made had reportedly gone down the drain. The pressure was coming from both directions. And then, right before his death, he sent that message asking for 3 crore rupees. But there was another detail investigators reportedly discovered. Mir Raza had 3 bank accounts. Their records were examined, and according to the case information, the combined balances amounted to only a few lakh rupees, not crores. So now another question emerged. Where had all the money gone? And why had the situation become so desperate that Mir Raza believed his life depended on finding 3 crore rupees? His father had his own argument. He said Mir Raza had built a brand called Flex and had established 4 branches at a relatively young age. So if his son was really facing such an extreme financial crisis, his father questioned why he couldn't have sold the brand, transferred a franchise, or handed over one of the branches in exchange for money. According to him, arranging 3 or 4 crore through the business should not have been impossible. Which brings us back to that final message. If there were other ways to arrange money, why did Mir Raza sound so desperate? Why did he say his life depended on it? And most importantly, what exactly was he so afraid of facing the next morning? Because by the time that morning arrived, Mir Raza was already dead. And investigators were now looking not only at his finances, but also at the people around him. That investigation would soon bring 14 to 15 people into police custody, and one particular location directly opposite the scene would also attract attention. And that's where the case was about to become even more complicated. The police investigation was now widening. Around 14 to 15 people were reportedly taken into custody, including people who allegedly had money dealings with Mir Raza. Investigators were also questioning people connected to a guest house directly opposite the location where the incident happened. That meant investigators were not looking at just one possibility. They were examining the people who had financial connections with Mir Raza, the area surrounding the incident, and the circumstances of his final hours. But his father's questions were becoming more specific. He wasn't simply asking why his son needed money. He wanted to know whether the financial problems could really explain everything that happened afterward. Mir Raza had reportedly suffered major losses in digital currency beginning in December 2025, and by 2026 the losses had become severe. At the same time, people who had lent him money were reportedly demanding repayment. So yes, the financial pressure was serious. But according to his father, there was another side to the story. Mir Raza had built Flex into a brand with 4 branches despite being relatively young. His father believed that if his son desperately needed 3 or 4 crore rupees, he could have sold the brand, transferred a franchise, or handed over one branch and raised money that way. So why didn't he? Why send a message saying his life depended on the money? Why tell someone he wasn't sure he would be able to meet them the following day? Those questions became even more important when investigators reviewed his banking history. Mir Raza reportedly had 3 bank accounts, but the records showed only a few lakh rupees in them. The money he was urgently asking for simply wasn't there. And that left investigators with a financial picture that was anything but simple. There were losses. There were debts. There were people waiting for repayment. There was a desperate request for 3 crore rupees. And then there was Mir Raza's final day. His father, meanwhile, was questioning another part of the case, the idea that his son had harmed himself. He believed the pistol could have been carried for protection rather than for any intention to harm himself. His argument was that people sometimes carry firearms because they believe they need to protect themselves. But that still didn't answer why Mir Raza, who was reportedly known to be afraid of guns, had taken a pistol with him that day. And it didn't answer the family's question about the reported absence of blood at the location where his body was found. Those details were now being placed before the court and the investigators. The family wanted the grave opened so forensic specialists could examine the remains again. The court approved the request. A medical board was formed, and the case entered a new stage. But there is something important to understand here. The father's statements were allegations and questions, not proof that someone else was responsible. The available account does not establish who caused Mir Raza's death. It also does not establish that the scene was staged. Those were possibilities the family wanted investigated. And that's why the forensic examination mattered so much. If the physical evidence supported the family's concerns, the investigation could move in a very different direction. If it didn't, then the family would have to confront a very different conclusion. Either way, the evidence had to come first. And that brought everyone back to the message sent on July 28th. Mir Raza had reportedly told the builder that he urgently needed 3 crore rupees. He said his life depended on the amount. He said he was having troubling thoughts. And he said he wasn't ready to face the next morning. Then, around 4 p.m., he left home. By July 29th, he was dead. That timeline is what makes the final message so important. It shows that something had clearly been weighing heavily on him before his death. But the available information doesn't tell us exactly what that something was. Was it simply the crushing pressure of debt and financial losses? Was he afraid of someone? Was he expecting something to happen the following morning? Or was there another explanation that investigators had not yet established? Those questions remain questions unless the evidence answers them. And that's why Mir Raza's father's decision to seek another examination became so significant. He reportedly understood that opening the grave would be painful. But he believed that leaving the case as it stood would be even harder. He wanted to know who was responsible, why it happened, and how it happened. Now, with the medical board in place and the investigation continuing, the family was waiting for evidence that could finally clarify what happened. Because the case had already moved beyond a simple story about financial trouble. It had become a case involving a desperate final message, disputed circumstances, a firearm, multiple people questioned by police, financial pressure, and a family demanding another look at the evidence. And at the center of it all was one unanswered question. Was Mir Raza's death really what it first appeared to be, or had something happened that investigators still needed to uncover? Lessons from the darkness. 1. Don't ignore a desperate message. When someone suddenly says their life depends on money, talks about disturbing thoughts, or suggests they may not make it to the next day, that shouldn't be brushed aside. Take those words seriously and try to get them immediate help. 2. Financial pressure can hide bigger problems. Debt and major financial losses can put enormous pressure on a person, but financial trouble doesn't automatically explain everything that happens afterward. When something goes wrong, investigators need to examine the complete picture rather than assuming one explanation. 3. Questions need evidence, not rumors. In a case surrounded by uncertainty, it's easy for people to jump to conclusions. But allegations, suspicions, and theories aren't the same as proven facts. The truth has to come from reliable evidence and a proper investigation. 4. Families deserve clear answers. When a family believes important questions remain unanswered, transparency matters. A thorough investigation can help separate what is known from what is only suspected, and sometimes taking another look at the evidence is necessary to reach the truth.